Hello, today is August 5th, 2019. This is the standard testing comments office hours. If you can add your details to the agenda, that would be super duper. Let me open up a document here and we can walk through an agenda. If you could add your deets to the attending list, that would be helpful. Let me go to share screen, testing comments, kabang. Hopefully folks can see my screen. Yes, no, maybe so.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. First up, John.
So I have a link to an issue I filed a while back, but I have just failed to bring up at any of our meetings. I want to have a way to get progress reporting from the framework, since runs can be multiple hours long, especially if you have more than just conformance tests. The way I have envisioned doing that is via just like a webhook. So the Ginkgo already has this idea of custom reporters, which get invoked before test runs, after test runs, all that sort of stuff. And it has a ton of information that a human would really like to know, just like how many tests are we going to run, what test are we currently at, what is the name of the current test. And like if you just watch the logs go right now, it's just a sea of words and it's hard to get any of that information. So I want at least to be able to fire off this information to a webhook that the user can configure, probably through like an environment variable. And like, so my personal intent is to use that for Sonobui, but the webhook implementation will be generic to where even if you want to run like a local web server so that you are intercepting those and just printing that data, right? That would even be more useful than a lot of the log output. So I kind of like in the next 2 weeks, I'll probably try and write up an implementation of that and run it by this group. But as of now, at least I wanted high-level feedback if people had strong feelings one way or the other, or some concern that had not been mentioned in the ticket.
I'm just thinking, it seems like a product of Ginkgo, right? Because only Ginkgo would know the full suite of tests that you're running. Like the framework would have no idea. So passing in a webhook sounds fair right now. I always knew that doing the custom reporter would be the best way to get progress.
Yeah.
The question I have is, it seems kind of weirdly kludgy, right? Like in that you don't actually have progress reporting as part of the output of the current run. Like you would want a default, I debate whether or not you'd want a default implementation that just logs locally, right?
Yeah, I mean, so that was one thing. I mean, right now we just have logs as the default, even though, right, like logs are good to have, but it's at least is what's being printed out to standard out. I don't know if that should be the default. That's I think a bigger and a separate change, if that's what you are meaning.
Well, if there was some type of metadata that was in the log output that actually gave you status, because that's a problem we currently don't solve. Right? Like the problem with progress is that like it's going to be relative. Like you're going to see progress of like you're executing X number of tests. Your X tests done. It'll give you no idea of how long it'll take, right?
Sure, we're right, but it's a step in the right direction. And even if you only had one test left, there's no way objectively to know, is it a 5-minute test? Is it a scale test that's going to take an hour? So I think the benchmark needs to be just number of tests done, that sort of stuff. How many are we targeting? How many have we finished? How many have passed and failed? And I'm fine with also omitting that in the default reporter, or like sending these sort of summary information also to standard out or in the logs. Like I can integrate that too, but one way or the other, we have to have that custom reporter, or custom logic to print what we want.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So you would just like to not see it just over the webhook, but also in the logs?
I think that'd be useful for any humans parsing it too. Because right now, like it's the log output is, as long as you have some key identifiers inside of there in the log output that would help to delineate when one test ends, the other test begins.
Yeah.
It's just generally difficult.
Yeah, because you don't know, like, the steps look like tests when it's just like, I doing this, it should do this. It's,
Yeah. So that's my only.
I will add that as a comment and on the issue and show up hopefully in 2 weeks with some sort of implementation.
Okay, that'll work. That'd be great. We've been needing this for a long time. Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns from other folks? Going once, twice, 3 times. Great. George and Andrew.
Yeah, so this is a PR that George opened, which just adds an import restrictions file. I wanted to bring it up in this meeting, mostly as an FYI that this list of dependencies we're going to have to start pruning as we start cleaning things up. I know from previous efforts of doing this, it was pretty easy to forget about this import restriction file, and we don't actually go back to it and clean things up. So yeah, like if you end up cleaning a package or something, go back to this and make sure that you remove any deps that aren't there anymore.
We could call that out as part of the reviews.
There's a lot in there.
There's a lot more than I was thinking.
It's because it also tracks transient dependencies, which is the kind of which is why it's so easy to kind of lose track. So it looks like a lot, but from my experience, what ends up happening is that there's usually like one import somewhere that pulls in like 10 different things. So if you pull that one import out, you usually go through that list pretty fast, or faster than you think.
I know we already did a bunch of this by, this is just for the framework?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we have, does the import boss run as part of like the PR blocking jobs?
Yes.
Very cool. So
yeah,
what's the name of the verify that'll fail if you do something bad? Verify what?
If you go back to the PR, there's already one that's failing.
On this PR?
Yeah. So we forgot to add utils net, and so the pull Kubernetes verified fails. Yeah, right there.
All right, that's useful. Found forbidden imports. Perfect.
Yeah. So yeah. So George, we just got to add the utils net there, and then I can ping whoever. Yeah. Probably need to. I'm probably gonna ping like DIMS about it, just because code organization. Just let them know that we're gonna add this to the import restriction file.
Well, there was the open question about that top one, the staging publishing. They didn't think that should be there. Unless someone here has context on that. Otherwise, I think they were going to follow up with code organization as well for that.
I missed that comment. Can you go back up?
Yeah, that one. So in order to make the there's a CI script that's called verify imports. In order to make that one run, had to make the addition, those changes.
It shouldn't be in staging. That's kind of it's not in staging yet, and unless we're actually publishing to an external repo, the import restrictions shouldn't be in staging.
So what was interesting is that if you open up that file, and go to the top, it has a non-staging import already, which is why I thought it was okay. Like all the way to the top, yeah. Yeah, it has the internal APIs there. And maybe the internal APIs are an exception because, whatever.
Well, the internal APIs are an exception because like I'm trying to think here. They shouldn't be.
Okay, so either way, it seems like, okay, I'll bring this up with code organization and we can figure out.
Yeah.
Okay.
DIMS. Yeah.
I had a quick comment here. In the kubeadm import boss file, we basically do not have when we update the import boss file for kubeadm, we don't have to update the same staging YAML file that George had to do. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
Okay, that's good to know. Wait, just making sure though. Like, are you sure that the import restriction file is isn't just being ignored? Like you've seen CI fail from it?
I think yes, it
Okay.
failed.
Okay, yeah, I'll follow up.
Right. I too had not seen a YAML generated file that you required. Right. This is the long-standing one where we should debate upon whether or not to revert it.
Yeah.
I think, hold on, let me double check this. I had a tab open on my other screen before about this. I don't think it matters right now, to be honest. If we come across an issue, we'll deal with it. I do think that it's not really required. I really wish Omichi would join this call. I know it's difficult probably being in Japan, or to at least coordinate with this group. He kind of does things on his own time against whatever agenda he decides, which is a little frustrating at times because we get PRs that are unrelated to the work that we're doing. I don't know if anyone's talked with him at all because he's in Japan, so Europeans would have a better chance of chatting with him. Have you chatted with him, Vladimir?
So this is about Omichi?
Yes.
So Omichi is West Coast.
Oh, he's West Coast?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know why he's... I should try to ping him sometime and corner him to figure out what he's doing.
I think this should be a good time for him to join this particular hour, actually.
Yeah. I will try to poke him to join this meeting then. I think it's fine to leave it here until there's an issue. And if we need to, we can revert it. I don't think it should be a restriction. What he's doing is adding a lot of restrictions to style inside of the PR blocking jobs. I don't necessarily think that's a requirement because we may want to burn all this to the ground at some point. And if you have 12,000 style checkers and you're burning things to the ground, well, of course, you're going to break all over the place. You're going to spend more time updating all the different associated style checkers than you will actually making the code refactor. Are there other group topics? I was actually burning through my review backlog today directly on this topic and conformance. So I don't know if there's any other group topics that folks wanted to discuss.
Oh, actually, I do, now that I think about it. There was the issue, let me see if I put up the PR about being able to run the tests on clusters with tainted nodes. And there was some disagreement, right? Tim, you and I had originally decided to try and like whitelist a set of allowed taints.
Yes.
And when Jordan Liggett kind of took over because he was like farther along on an implementation, it seems like he had a separate set of conversations and had resolved to just say, we will remove most of that logic and just say, we'll only error if we have like these like out of memory taints and those sorts of like known bad state issues. And it seemed like you disagreed with that, but now I feel like I'm playing middleman between the two of you. So I'm not sure what it's going to take for us to agree what we need done there.
Can you post the issue and make it an action item for me? Because I'm going through the issues right now, so I will.
Okay.
I will take a look. Let me take a look at my backlog here. I do not have that many more issues to go through, so I can go through that one.
Okay, awesome. I just found it, so let me paste.
Just say
And then there was also some question, Jordan Liggett had suggested we add some sort of flag to say, even if, like, let's say somebody is having this problem, we should have a way to flip off this behavior entirely and just start up, run the test, don't care about anything at all.
I disagree with that.
Oh, okay. Because, you know, it was difficult then how to implement that, because it makes sense at a test initialization step to say, okay, we'll just start the test. Don't worry about any of this waiting logic. But there's a bunch of tests which will do something destructive and then call into that code path that says, like, wait until I'm in a testable state again. And so if they provide this flag that ignores startup initialization stuff, it makes, I think, an unknown number of tests really awkward. Or
yeah,
maybe
I don't agree with that at all. I think he might be shooting from the hip there with regards to implementation details. Do you have an issue with that? Is there an issue number that references that, or is that in 78500?
It's the same one that was. I mean, that's just the pull request. Yeah, I think the discussion is all there. And I mean, I had an implementation that already had that, but a lot of it was from offline conversations because it was just an awkward thing because I started it, he took over, it fell to his back burner, so I took over. And so there was all these Slack handoff notes.
Okay, well, let me take a look at it, and if there's more history here in this issue, please link it, and then I'll take a look. But I do think that we need to get this in place because this is a problem for a number of deployment scenarios where people deploy they fully taint their environments from the beginning. And a good example of this in common use case too is also cloud providers as well. Some people defaultly configure everything to be tainted on entry.
And I know people are interested on this. And the question was raised, I think just today, whether or not this would be cherry picked. Do you think if everybody was happy and this got in, would it be cherry picked into the 15 branch?
Because this is technically, if we follow policy, the answer would be no.
Okay.
So it's existed in perpetuity for a long time. There is known workarounds, which is don't taint your whole cluster.
Okay.
And then this would be a feature change. So technically, if we follow policy, the answer is no.
Okay. I will make a note of that too, just for my own memory, and I'll put that on the ticket.
Are there other issues that folks wanted to bring up? Hippie, how goes that doc? Can't hear you if you're talking.
Is it working?
Yeah, I can hear
Sorry,
you.
I'm not at my machine today. I'm having some problems getting into the office. Refresh my memory real quick on the doc.
The doc is if I could have a pony, what would the shape of the pony be, and what would
Yep, we've had a couple comments on it. I would love to get a little more notes. I can't drop the link, but I've dropped it into several channels. I've really only gotten one external person to add anything.
Okay. I think we should add as an action item to review the current state of the doc. Action item for this team. And then by next time, we should have review comments to discuss that so we can actually walk through your doc.
Thanks.
Let's see if there's other things that we had as action items before. Jai Tong just submitted that PR, so that's done. This is that's the previous thing we just talked about. Google Docs there. You have it available. We'll take a look. All right. I don't have anything else. Are there other topics that folks wanted to discuss?
I'm good.
All right, we can get like 40 minutes back, and I will. Oh,
One quick question: we're going through and trying to generate metadata on all of the tests, and one of the things we found is two things. If there are tests that use string interpolation at the it level, we cannot promote them to conformance it. It's particularly used in patterns where they're using a variable tree, and on the innermost loop, interpolating those variables into the string. So two things there. We're trying to find ways to walk the code tree and get as much metadata as possible. And some things we don't have yet are the nested describes and expects inside the Ginkgo language, so that we can clearly identify that full string that we use inside of TestGrid and an API Snoop to identify a test, to be able to link it to a specific test, within the source code. Does anybody have some experience looking through the AST or finding ways where we can generate more metadata than what we have in the comments field?
I think that's the same. I think that's the same thing John is working on. Is that the Ginkgo has a hook mechanism for you to hook into to be able to get the full call site and text string of whatever you're working on. So that a lot of information, but it's only done at runtime, right? So like,
I've used that.
Yeah. So and unfortunately, it doesn't provide you with the code block for it. However, you could still leverage that to at least get that full, like the call site and the full descriptor, and then use that in combination with a custom script to go there and parse the AST and get the comments. That's the best thing I could think of. And with the string interpolation, I know the frustration that you're having, because even if you walk the AST, you have to have like kind of infinite number of like, if it's this kind, 10 different types of functions that it could be, and then in the end you'd still only get the variables. So that's a very practical, I think, requirement to not use the string interpolation. But.
Okay, that's what we've got a couple of tests we're trying to promote to conformance, and we're just rewriting to remove those strings.
Okay. And if you have something with AST, I just recently had tried to do something like that, do my own little code walker. I'd be happy to try and review. It's a little fresh in my mind.
We're currently finishing up importing that into our DB, as well as combining that with our conformance test runs with the audit logs.
Okay.
I think the idea of updating the conformance it call block to possibly write to a file in order to for a conformance run, letting us be able to map that would be great. Or finding a way. I don't know if this is possible in Gherk in Go, but overriding a function temporarily. So redefining what conformance it is, so that conformance it doesn't actually run pretty much the whole Ginkgo framework, so that all it does is run it to the point and record either basically mock a Ginkgo run to get a list of those tests and locations by overriding those functions,
well,
or adding it.
You can just do a dry run. Like you just so if you do a dry run, you can at least it'll still call all the custom reporters and everything. And so that can be really useful, and it's really fast. And even if the Ginkgo stuff doesn't give you the code block, it at least would tell you the file locations. But yeah, dry run will go through it and not actually invoke the function.
Excellent.
It does the selector, and it runs all like the pre and post stuff, but not the functional logic. So it just runs the framework, like the Ginkgo framework, not our framework.
Yeah. I've also been looking at and trying to look at possible other frameworks, looking at the components within our framework that are specific to Ginkgo, and trying to find ways to separate those out, including I believe the initialization processes for setting up the cluster. Basically, the pre setup of everything, and then the post tear down of everything, and then the pre-suite, post-suite, and then pre-test, post-test. Seeing if we can't generalize those into just functions that are called, and try to remove as much Ginkgo-specific stuff as possible, and maybe just detecting whether it's a Ginkgo run or not to do anything specific to Ginkgo. The reason for that was to try to use other ways to tag our tests and decide whether or not we want to run them using other tag matchers, for example, rather than just the regex across all of the strings.
Yeah, I missed the capability of running, like having a real sort of suite runner where you could run a subset, versus doing a string parsing regex across all of the strings. Although it's super powerful, don't get me wrong.
It's great. It gets complex when you want to do multiple things, or you want to figure out how to focus on a tree, because we do kind of have it tends to be a tree style structure with a few tags, but ours is just tags. So anytime
know or have experience with like how open Ginkgo is with like people contributing, because it's on GitHub, but I've never actually made a change. But if
so in the early days, it would take a while to get PRs merged. Onsi is not very responsive because he's pretty busy doing stuff, and he's pretty much the sole owner maintainer of that repo. Now he does merge the PRs eventually or address them. It just takes a while. So you got to factor that into the equation. One thing I want to do is maybe we can table this and take a look at Hippie's document, and maybe we should evaluate, if we could have a pony, what are all how many hooves it have, and what's the horn look like, and what does the mane look like? Because I think in the ideal state, instead of trying to make Ginkgo do all the things, maybe we can abstract Ginkgo away to the point where we could eventually use the framework to call in some other suite.
No, I've got a prototype PR that's very ugly that I think does a little bit of the opposite. It still uses ede.test binary, but it adds a --godog flag that it just, instead of running the godog suite, ends up running instead of running our current suite, runs godog. And I rewrote some of the loading functions so that it would, depending on running godog, only initialize the non-Ginkgo specific parts of our framework. But I ran into some pain points.
I'm not going to lie. That is a terrible thing. That's like a human animal hybrid you just created. If we're going to do this, I'd rather you do something fresh, right? Or to abstract. Yeah.
I was trying to address the concern. Don't throw away all our existing work.
Well, if anything, wrap the framework. That's the best mentality. The framework was written to wrap Ginkgo behavior for the most part. And if there are things where we can wrap it even more and get a little bit cleaner. And that's primarily the job of this group anyways. Like, we're trying to abstract away the dependencies currently, just so we can actually vendor it in a clean way. And it's a huge problem that the community needs and wants to have solved. The community needs a framework that they can leverage that basically knows Kubernetes. And without that, they basically recreate the universe in a terrible way, or they vendor in everything, and which is also just as bad. So this is needed by both the Kubernetes developers, but also the ecosystem of developers.
Yep. It might be useful for me. I know we're talking about the document that describes our favorite pony world, but what it is that our current framework provides, like our framework, not Ginkgo, what it does that we want to keep. And what I mean is by what it provides to the people writing the tests. Like they expect, there's the namespace deletion. That is another issue I wanted to see if the namespace deletion can be sped up by using etcd3, and we provide, like, just knowing that we provide namespace deletion would be great. but I don't know if there's a place where that's documented, or if it'd be worthwhile creating another document to make sure that information is gathered by people who understand that and have written that framework.
Well, you kind of conflated two separate things. The namespace deletion is a separate problem, which we leverage inside of the test framework as a way to reduce collisions, right, in the test and have parallelization. So, but that's a super useful thing that we should fix anyways, right? Do you have that issue logged? Because Clayton said he was going to take a look at it and resource it.
I believe the issue is logged. We'd have to. I don't have my machine, so I can't look it up.
John, could you follow up with Hippie afterwards? Like, this has been a thorn in the side of the testing framework forever.
About the namespace deletion not being as blocking. That's what you're saying?
Well, it's just sometimes it'll take forever, right? Like, having like a force, right?
On the largest of clusters, if the namespace still has things in it, it will consistently take around 20 seconds to 25 seconds. And if I think there was something in etcd 3 where instead of looking at the objects that are contained within it, it just ensures they will be deleted and returns instantly, or fairly instantly, that yes, the namespace will go away. Thank you.
There's something far more fundamental inside of the cleanup, the object cleanup code that makes it on the order of minutes to even an hour for some scenarios. So
you're talking about the actual like internal Kubernetes cleanup, not a framework implementation, or
correct. This is the core of Kubernetes of how it does namespace deletions, all the way into cleaning up the GUI inside of etcd. That's a separate issue that we should address.
There was two options. One was queue up and delay the broken namespace deletion until later, and the other was go fix namespace deletion so it doesn't have the. I don't think we created the one for actually go fix the namespace deletion. We just created a ticket for please fix the testing framework to delay deletion until the cleanup at the end of the entire run, not at the end of each test.
I mean, actually going and changing the way namespaces are deleted definitely seems out of the mission statement of this group. So like, who do we need to go talk to? Because I'm sure there's some trade-off. If we change something, it's going to speed it up, but there's going to be some downside, right? Or if not, like, why don't we just kick the issue to that group and fix it?
Yeah, because it's API machinery and it's as old as time, and it's unnecessarily complicated as all hell. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem. And so kicking things to another group just basically means like, yeah, you put another rock on a rock pile. We'll get to it, when the heat death of the universe happens. So
okay. Yeah, we can look into it. It's definitely something that helps everyone, every user of Kubernetes. So definitely useful.
There's a couple different issues entangled in the namespace deletion, but I think having one umbrella issue for forced namespace deletion would be good. So,
and when you refer to forced, you mean eventually deleted namespace, like, or what do you mean?
Well, part of the test, there's two parts. There's part of the testing framework blocks forever, even if the namespace is in the deleting state.
Sure.
So like, and part of it should be like after a period, like when the suite is ended, like there shouldn't be like 500 namespaces hanging around saying deleting, right? But one would hope that by the time the suite ends, that you should force delete all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that would cause a rippling effect throughout your cluster to delete all this goo. So maybe I should write up the issue.
Yeah, because now I'm getting confused because it seems like you're bouncing back to the testing comment specific thing and not the one that's about the core namespace deletion.
Well, let me open up an issue because it's going to ripple across both.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess maybe I'm just seeing them as two very separate issues. I know we're dealing with both, but
we'll make it an umbrella. How's that sound? All right. What other stuff we got? Are there other things folks want to talk about?
I know we were talking about delaying looking at the what was on the document until like people get a chance to. It's not too long at this point. It might be nice just to get the feedback on what's there, so that as I'm tuning and looking at framework options, I have the feedback from this meeting. If that's okay. It's
Okay. Let's take a look here. Well, it's pretty short. Pain points. Discovery of enabled feature.
the way I'm structuring it. Is this the way we want it structured?
I would say goals. I would have it outlined almost like a higher level proposal, like a CAP, where you'd outline what are the goals, the non-goals, what are your motivations, why. So I think first feedback I would say is that it should be like a CAP, right? That
All right.
outlines.
Reformat as cap. Will do.
Some of these I don't know if you can even address because these are core Kubernetes things. Right? Like core Kubernetes doesn't actually do all of this stuff. I wish it did, but it doesn't without component config.
And is component config something that we've started using on new features so that we know whether they're enabled or not? Because that's part of this is pain points for us is discovering whether a particular endpoint parameter or property is available to be tested because it's not enabled or not.
Yeah, the component config should tell you if it's enabled or not, but it's not uniformly. It's not done. It's a very, very pre-alpha work. It's like an alpha work in progress, and we're constantly changing it. Okay. So that falls underneath the auspices of SIG cluster lifecycle, and folks are actively working on it. There's a separate working group to address that particular set of problems, but I wouldn't. I don't think we can rely on it yet. It's not there.
That's fine.
Parallelization. I want suites. So like, I don't necessarily think the problem is I think the problem is with how some of the tests are created. It is a pain point, but I think the biggest constraint currently is that how auditing of the tests to reduce collisions. Metadata surrounding tests. I don't know if that's, to be honest, like it is both a feature and a pain, right? Regexes are so powerful you can do anything, and regex that's a feature and it's also a pain, right? So one of the things we could do or evaluate, as like having more well-defined ways of specifying it, because currently we're pretty, rudimentary. We use a bracket for most things for tags. So it's possible we could use this mechanism of metadata, whatever it may be, to create the feature we want, which is basically suites. Right? And have a hierarchical flow through properly defined semantics through proper tag references.
Right. And that's currently all defined as far as the test in just that string, but we've started adding other metadata inside the comments, and I'm just trying to figure out which ones that we actually want out of a greenfield and mapping those existing things that we currently depend on. And trying to figure out how they would map to.
I think writing down the list of metadata that we want and saying like, here's a test and we would like to address it in these ways and we would like to be able to run it in this fashion, I think would outline the different user stories. Validating test requirements or features used.
This I just wrote because I've had two separate things. One is figuring out which tests use SSH, and then figuring out like what test images are used and then how many tests. Like both of those things have just been really difficult. And I wondered if there would be a way to sort of have certain calls in the call stack bubble up that metadata so that then if you did some sort of dry run or some sort of analysis run, you don't have to have some super smart code walker to figure it out for you. That would be nice. I don't know if that's possible, but it would be nice.
We could use API Snoop to grab the different features, or the different images used by the test right now.
Mm-hmm.
It would
but you would actually have to run the test run, right?
Yeah, you would.
Yeah, that's the thing. So to analyze the entire test suite, you can't really do it. Like you'd have, because some things are just going to be broken, they're not going to run, and the pre-hook it's going to fail, so it's never going to run the image. So yeah, for 2,000 tests, it's just impossible, or 3,000 tests, kind of impossible to do. And then, like you said, you hit all those other AST walking problems with deeply nested things or things with code or string interpolation. So it's a different type of AST object. It's a pain.
A lot of these things come down to like having well-defined suites. Next one is like selection based off metadata. That to me sounds just like a suite, right? And
yeah.
yours sounds kind of like a suite too. Because you would hierarchically organize things if you actually had a suite structure that made sense.
Well, but if you're going to, you can have a suite and you can imagine one test in that suite uses a certain feature. This one test is going to check SSH something, or this one test is going to use a certain image. It would just be nice to be able to put a little, like on a function. Let's say we had a test with SSH function, and you add some one line of code, and any test that would call it would end up gathering that information. And then at the end of the day, like say, here is my bag of stuff, and I used SSH, and here's the test image I used.
If we had a well-defined structure, instead of kind of wrapping everything that had this metadata, well-defined set of metadata, you'd be able to get that programmatically, right?
Yeah.
So
I think you could sort of imagine the framework object just carrying a bag, literally a map of objects, and then in certain structures or in certain functions, you just add to it.
Or you could have, well-defined sets of metadata fields that we've defined. But yeah. This is exactly what you guys are basically saying. These last three features saying very, very similar things that overlap. So this is Patrick's, where it says selection based off metadata, be able to produce dry run that says if behavior A or behavior B, then here's the full test case list. Yeah, that's a suite. That's the definition. Iteration variables, run a test case. We actually have this today. Run a test case twice with different variables as part of the test context.
Go look at the storage. Lots of examples. It's hard to read, but it's there.
I think I just saw those today, and I looked at them sideways and just walked away and said, I think they have a lot of test cases. I think that's what this means.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous to try to map those through, and that's why we haven't promoted any of those. In addition to there not being any ways to test the storage yet.
So
go ahead.
I would make these statements even like more generic. It'd be like we want a well-defined configuration file format, which could be component config, which most likely in Kubernetes space would be component config, right? We want behavioral-driven testing, right? Automated behavior definitions, yes. I think this falls underneath BDD, right? So if we have a BDD thing, we have some well-defined BDD thing.
I've been looking at that a bit closer and getting very intimate with all of what we have available in Swagger JSON to query in any form. And we do have some parameters, but we don't have sequence of operations tying things together to do those sequences. Those are things that are.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I fully expect that. I think we can only auto-generate a certain amount, and that's totally fine because the APIs were not meant to be fully automated away. Behavioral definition testing, define tests separately from behaviors, time back implementations to behaviors.
This is primarily focusing on Aaron's request for I want a file. I want one group of people to promote the behaviors, and another people promoting the tests and reviewing and approving. Because some of that's not explicit in a BDD framework. It's definitely not the way that we have it currently.
I think one of the things I would want to add as high-level requirements are like, I don't think any test should be colliding, except for when they're within a suite, right?
Can you rephrase that? You don't want any test to be collided?
Colliding unless they are within a suite, right? Like if I'm testing a behavior feature or behavior, I don't think any behavior should collide with anything else. So I should be able to run like, if we had a well-defined set of like scheduling or pod or I don't know, we'd have to think about like there's going to be a superset which has to be run serially, but then there's going to have to be things that are below it. If we had a suite, each suite should be able to run in total parallel with the other suite, right?
It'd be interesting to see what are the current collisions, so that I guess you're saying put it into suites, so that suite, anything that might collide. But what's an example of a collision that would force us to go in parallel? I wasn't there when those things happened.
I've only seen a few collisions. There's been one that I saw that was actually, it was put as a serial test. It seemed almost like to be safe. It was like we're doing a lot of an operation and it's flaky if it's not in parallel. But again, like as things got better of a scale, that I said probably wasn't necessary. And then the other one, I mean, just all the destructive tests, right? Those have to be run serially.
Yep. So a good example is that most of these tests should be considered suites for the most part, right? Like the way the hierarchical structure is written down. But we don't actually we have some tagging inside of there to execute them as a given thing, but we use it as execute A versus B. But one would expect that you would have very few serial tests that would have any collision that would allow you to execute, API machinery and, I don't know, kubectl. I'm trying to think, like from a high level requirements view, I think there's a lot more the more I think about it. Like I need to actually I can't give you a hot take feedback because I need to actually think about, compare this with other frameworks.
Yeah.
I think
we've got this where we would want what we want out of a framework. It might be useful in at least some instances to point to several frameworks that do it in a similar way to what we're describing, just so that in some ways we're creating a new vocabulary. I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I think that should come up with a lexicon in this document. So usually if you look at some other specs, they'll have a glossary or a lexicon listed at the top. So like you kind of created your own document format here when like if you look at the examples in the enhancements repo, there are plenty of ones that outline a well-defined structure for how we do proposals like within the KEP. And a lot of them actually refer to a section where they have lexicon at the top.
Okay.
So I still think it's going to require more time than we have on this call to go through and think about what it is we would want.
It's helpful to know to restructure it and the feedback to make sure it's consumable. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Are there any other topics? So I've got a bunch of action items to file issues. Let me just list them out here. And one is to take a look at John's issue. whitelist or PR. Folks on this call need to review Hippie's doc, and we'll have a more informed discussion next time. And I need to create an issue with regards to namespace deletion. Umbrella issue with namespace deletion. Anything else? Once, twice, 2 times. All right. Take care. Have a great week.